What if everything the public thought they knew about Labour's plans was just a distraction? Behind the scenes, a secret plan was forming, one that could have quietly pulled Britain back toward the European Union. But before that plan could take root, the Supreme Court slammed the brakes, leaving Keir Starmer's team stunned and scrambling. This isn't just political drama, it's a legal earthquake that could shake the foundation of Labour's credibility. *4 months, whispers had been growing around Westminster. Some said Keir Starmer was playing a clever long game, promising Brexit respect on the surface while working behind the scenes to rebuild bridges with Brussels. Publicly, Labour claimed there would be no return to the EU. But quietly, documents and private briefings painted a different story. Reports began surfacing about informal meetings between senior Labour advisors and European trade officials. These weren't just standard diplomatic talks, they hinted at something more. Insiders revealed that Labour was discussing alignment on trade rules, regulatory cooperation, and even a pathway agreement that would make it easier to rejoin EU bodies later on, without triggering alarm among pro-Brexit voters. One leaked memo, allegedly shared with EU diplomats, spoke of a phased reintegration into select EU institutions. While it avoided words like rejoining, the language was carefully crafted to suggest a soft reversal of Brexit's most critical separations. And the kicker? The plan seemed designed to avoid immediate parliamentary scrutiny. This raised questions fast. How could any political party, especially one expected to uphold democratic accountability, be negotiating policy directions with foreign officials without consulting Parliament or the public? Political analysts noted that the plan seemed structured to bypass open debate, possibly until after the next general election, by which time, the moves might already be too deep to reverse. The public was left in the dark. There were no press briefings. No official statements. Not even cautious policy updates. Instead, everything happened in hushed meetings and encrypted messages. According to sources close to both UK and EU delegates, it wasn't long before opposition MPs, particularly from pro-sovereignty and Brexit-supporting parties, began demanding answers. Nigel Farage, now leading Reform UK, went on national television accusing Labour of quietly reversing Brexit without a mandate. Several Tory backbenchers echoed his warning, calling it a betrayal of trust on a national scale. Then came the legal challenge. A coalition of MPs and a transparency watchdog filed a formal complaint in court. They argued that any policy or engagement that directly affects the UK's international agreements must be brought before Parliament. Keeping such strategic planning in secret, especially when it involved EU negotiations, was not only deceptive but potentially unlawful. Their case made it clear, the British public has a right to know if their leaders are planning to rewrite the rules they voted for. The court agreed to review the matter. And that's when things got serious. Legal experts warned that if the court found even partial evidence of secret coordination without constitutional process, Labour could face a massive legal and political blow. The case went to the Supreme Court faster than expected, and that's where the first real bombshell hit. While we'll get into the court's full verdict in the next section, this first act of the story has already shifted public trust. A secret plan, hidden from debate. Silent meetings with Brussels. And now, the highest court in the land watching closely. Whatever the intention behind Starmer's EU roadmap, whether it was practical, idealistic, or purely political, it now stands at the center of a national storm. The moment the whispers became louder and the memos began to leak, political opponents and legal watchdogs knew they had one chance to stop the secret plan before it went too far. It wasn't just about party politics anymore, it became a battle over legal transparency, public trust, and whether one man could steer a nation's course in secret. The center of this legal storm was a group called the UK Constitutional Clarity Alliance, a non-partisan watchdog known for challenging government secrecy. Alongside them were a handful of high-profile MPs, some conservative, some from Reform UK, and even a few disgruntled Labour backbenchers who felt betrayed by the leadership's quiet pivot toward Brussels. Together, they filed a petition to the High Court. Their core argument was simple: if Keir Starmer or his shadow cabinet had been involved in active political negotiations or planning with EU representatives without notifying Parliament, it was a clear violation of constitutional norms. The group referenced specific laws requiring ministerial transparency in matters of foreign policy, especially those tied to international agreements or shifts in sovereignty. What made the challenge stronger was the evidence, several leaked emails and meeting records obtained by journalists and former insiders. One document showed a Labour policy advisor writing to an EU official about quiet alignments in regulation post-election, hinting that public clarity would come only when politically convenient. Another email spoke of a reconnect framework being discussed off the record and out of the public's view. The pressure mounted when this evidence was laid out in court filings. The petitioners argued that this wasn't just a policy discussion. It was, in effect, a shadow negotiation, something the British public had never consented to, especially after years of Brexit debate and the hard-won referendum result. The government had no choice but to respond. Although Labour denied that any formal negotiations had occurred, their legal team struggled to explain the context of the leaked materials. Were they casual conversations, or groundwork for future agreements? The answer wasn't clear, and the court wanted clarity. As pressure built, the High Court escalated the case straight to the Supreme Court, fast-tracking it due to urgent national interest. This move was rare, and it immediately caught media attention. Overnight, headlines across the country asked, "Is Labour trying to reverse Brexit in secret?" Social media exploded, with voters from both sides demanding accountability. In the Supreme Court, the hearings were intense. Lawyers for the petitioners laid out their case in sharp detail. They argued that even if no formal treaty was signed, the act of conducting unofficial diplomatic engagements without parliamentary approval was a breach of democratic duty. They highlighted the principle that Parliament, not party leadership, holds sovereignty in the UK's constitutional structure. Labour's defence, meanwhile, was more cautious. They insisted that Starmer was merely gathering international insight to prepare for any future government role. They claimed that no promises were made, no commitments signed, and therefore no rules were broken. But their words didn't erase the impact of the evidence, especially not the tone of the private messages that clearly suggested coordination. Outside the court, political drama surged. Protesters gathered, some waving Union Jacks and shouting, "Respect our vote." Others held signs that read, "Starmer's EU betrayal." MPs from the Conservative and Reform parties took to interviews and social platforms, declaring this legal case a turning point in British politics. What made things worse for Labour was that even their own members started to fracture. One anonymous Labour MP told a political outlet, "If the public think we're lying about Brexit again, we'll lose the next election." Full stop. Internal division was spreading like wildfire. As the hearing neared its end, there was no escaping the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just about whether one party had overstepped, it was about whether democracy itself had been sidelined in favor of quiet political games. The justices on the bench had to decide, had Starmer's team crossed a constitutional line? Or were these meetings just part of ordinary political groundwork? When the final arguments were heard, the court called for deliberation. The public waited. MPs waited. And Starmer, silent through much of the drama, knew that the next ruling could define not just his leadership, but Labour's future. The Supreme Court's verdict was coming next, and no one knew just how devastating it would be. When the Supreme Court released its ruling, the shock was immediate, and it wasn't just political. It was constitutional. For the first time in years, the highest court had stepped directly into the heart of a political controversy and delivered a verdict that sent tremors across every party in Westminster. The court ruled unanimously that Keir Starmer and senior members of his shadow cabinet had violated core principles of parliamentary transparency and democratic accountability. While the court stopped short of calling it an illegal act, they made it clear, engaging in back-channel talks with a foreign political body about future treaty changes, without disclosing it to Parliament or the public, was a breach of duty in a representative democracy. One line from the verdict stood out: when a party positions itself as a government in waiting, its actions carry weight beyond internal strategy. Secret international engagements that affect sovereignty must be disclosed. Democracy does not wait for power to be officially granted. The court did not accuse Labour of treason or formal lawbreaking. Instead, it reprimanded the party for operating in a gray zone of political ethics, a place where power is wielded in anticipation. of office, yet outside official accountability. It was a rare and powerful rebuke. No sitting government or opposition party in recent memory had been scolded so directly by the judiciary. The political fallout was explosive. Within minutes of the verdict being read, Conservative Party leaders called on Keir Starmer to issue an immediate public apology. Rishi Sunak, speaking from Downing Street, said, "This is not about Brexit anymore. This is about trust." And today, the court confirmed that Labour cannot be trusted to speak openly with the people they claim to serve. Nigel Farage was even more brutal. Standing outside Parliament, he declared, "They tried to sneak us back into the EU without saying a word. They treated the public like fools. And now they've been caught red-handed." Meanwhile, Labour's official response was cautious and defensive. A spokesperson claimed the ruling was a clarification of protocol, and insisted that no formal agreements or commitments were made. Starmer himself appeared in a short televised address, where he admitted the party should have communicated more clearly, but denied any intention to deceive the British public. But that wasn't enough to contain the damage. News channels ran constant coverage, replaying clips of Starmer's old speeches promising to respect the Brexit vote. Headlines blared phrases like, "Starmer's secret EU route blocked by court," and "A Labour's trust crisis deepens." On social media, hashtags like #StarmerEuLeak, #SupremeStrike, and #DemocracyViolated began trending within hours. Even within Labour's ranks, the ruling caused deep fractures. A number of Labour MPs, especially those from pro-Brexit constituencies, spoke out against the leadership. One MP from Northern England told reporters, "We spent years rebuilding trust in these communities after Brexit. And now, in one decision, it feels like we've thrown that away." Political strategists across the board agreed on one thing. This ruling had fundamentally altered the path to the next general election. What was once a strong, confident Labour narrative, based on stability, restoration, and competence, was now under siege from a court ruling that painted them as secretive and unaccountable. The Conservative Party wasted no time launching a nationwide campaign using the court's language. Billboards were quickly spotted in marginal constituencies with the slogan, "If they're this sneaky now, imagine them in power." Meanwhile, Reform UK surged in the polls, as voters angry over perceived Brexit betrayal shifted their allegiance again. Polling analysts suggested that a 3-point bump for Reform could cost Labour dozens of swing seats, but perhaps the most dangerous outcome for Labour wasn't legal or electoral, it was emotional. Voters who had slowly warmed back to Labour after years of Brexit division now felt confused, even betrayed. It wasn't just about the EU. It was about trust. About whether politicians were telling the truth, or just saying what they thought voters wanted to hear until they were in office. And as the dust settled from the Supreme Court's decision, one thing was clear: Labour wasn't just dealing with a legal defeat. They were facing a full-blown crisis of leadership, ethics, and direction. The question now, could they recover before the next election? The backlash came fast, and it came from everywhere. Across the UK, what started as a legal verdict quickly transformed into a full-blown public reckoning. The anger wasn't just political, it was personal. Millions of voters who had trusted Keir Starmer's words about respecting Brexit now felt blindsided. The Supreme Court might have delivered the ruling, but the people delivered the real judgment, and it was brutal. In traditional Labour strongholds like the Midlands and northern towns, reactions were sharp and emotional. In communities that had supported Brexit with clear majorities, many voters had reluctantly given Labour another chance after years of division. They believed Starmer when he promised to make Brexit work. But now, after the court confirmed secret dealings with the EU, many felt they'd been lied to. Local radio shows were flooded with calls from angry citizens. One caller from Doncaster said, "We gave him our vote because we thought he was different from Corbyn. But now he's done worse, at least Corbyn didn't hide it. Starmer said one thing, but behind closed doors, he was doing another." On social media, the fury was louder. TikTok and YouTube were filled with reaction videos calling it the ultimate betrayal. Twitter, now X, trended hashtags like #StarmerLies, #EUPlot, and #LabourUnmasked. Even neutral commentators couldn't ignore the shift. A BBC political analyst described it as the fastest loss of political goodwill in modern Labour history. The damage didn't stop with the public. Within Parliament, the ruling sparked a new wave of political warfare. The Conservative Party used the moment to go on the offensive. Rishi Sunak called an emergency press conference outside Number 10, where he declared, "This is about the soul of British democracy. The court has spoken. The people deserve leaders who speak plainly, not play games with power." He announced the formation of a cross-party inquiry into shadow diplomacy and called on Labour to release all communications related to the EU plan. That pressure put Starmer in a defensive corner with little room to move. Nigel Farage and Reform UK, meanwhile, celebrated the ruling like a victory parade. Farage held a massive rally in Birmingham, attracting thousands. On stage, he waved a printed copy of the Supreme Court verdict and shouted, "This paper proves what we've known all along, they never wanted to leave the EU. They just wanted us to stop paying attention." Farage's party saw a dramatic polling surge in just days, jumping from 9% to 15%, cutting deeply into Labour's base and threatening dozens of seats in key working-class regions. Analysts warned that even a minor reform boost could fracture Labour's chances in the next general election, but the most surprising backlash came from inside Labour itself. Some frontbenchers began questioning Starmer's leadership. Anonymous leaks to the press revealed internal chaos, with party staffers describing the atmosphere as panicked and divided. One MP reportedly told a colleague, "This is our Iraq War moment. People will remember this betrayal." Moderate Labour figures, especially those representing Brexit majority areas, publicly distanced themselves from the leadership's actions. A few even hinted that if the party didn't come clean fast, they might resign the whip altogether. Keir Starmer attempted to stop the bleeding by releasing a second, more emotional statement. In it, he said, "I understand the frustration. I understand the disappointment. We were exploring options, not making secret deals. But in hindsight, more transparency was needed." But the statement didn't land the way his team hoped. Political commentators called it cold, calculated, and too late. Voters saw it as damage control, not remorse. At the European level, the situation was awkward. Brussels remained largely silent. A short statement from an EU Commission spokesperson read, "We are aware of internal UK political matters. The European Union respects the sovereignty and democratic procedures of its former member states." Translation? "We're staying out of this mess." As pressure continued to mount, some observers began to ask a serious question: could this scandal cost Keir Starmer his leadership? The Labour leader was already under stress from factions inside the party. The left still didn't trust him, and now the centrists were shaken by his judgment. With every passing day, internal whispers of a leadership challenge grew louder. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Deputy Leader Angela Rayner were both rumored to be quietly gauging support behind closed doors. The damage wasn't limited to polls and popularity, it had cut into Labour's core identity. The party had spent years trying to rebuild its image as honest, responsible, and ready to govern. But now, in the eyes of many, it looked secretive, arrogant, and out of touch. Voters felt like the same elite games they voted against in 2016 were back, only this time, hidden behind polished speeches and legal language. The dust of outrage began to settle into hard reality. One question hovered in the air: would Labour survive this storm intact, or was this the beginning of its next great unraveling?